Every Friday, my husband stayed late at work, but one day he forgot his phone and a woman called, "Honey, are you on your way?" I silently drove to the address. What I saw inside turned my life upside down. Good day, dear listeners. It's Maria again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to believe that a good marriage was something you built the way you built a house, brick by brick, day by day, with patience and care. Daniel and I had been together for 11 years, married for 8 of them. We lived in a pale yellow colonial on Birchwood Drive in Naperville, Illinois, with a dog named Biscuit, a vegetable garden that only half worked, and the kind of life that looks exactly right in photographs. We had a mortgage, a joint savings account, 2 cars, and a standing Friday night tradition of takeout Thai food and whatever was new on Netflix. Simple, solid, ours. I'm Sarah Mitchell. I was 37 years old when everything I thought I knew came apart in a single evening. I worked as a project manager for a mid-size architecture firm downtown. I liked my job. I was good at it. Daniel was a structural engineer. We had met at a conference, actually, bonded over the absurdity of a keynote speaker who used the word synergy 14 times in 20 minutes. We laughed. We exchanged numbers. 3 months later, we were inseparable. 8 months after that, he proposed at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night while we were doing taxes, which was so wonderfully, perfectly us that I cried for an hour. So when did the cracks start forming? Looking back now, I can tell you exactly. It was the second Friday in March, about 7 months before that phone rang. He called at 6:15 to say he was stuck at the office. A client presentation had run long. He'd eat something near work, not to wait up. I remember heating up leftover soup, eating it alone at the island counter, thinking nothing of it. One late night. It happened to both of us sometimes. But then it was the next Friday, and the one after that. By April, Friday evenings at the office had become as reliable as the garbage truck. He always had an explanation that made structural sense. A deadline, a site inspection report, a contractor call that had gone sideways. Daniel spoke the language of logistics fluently, and I had always trusted that language. Why wouldn't I? He had never given me reason not to. Still, something small and quiet started shifting in me. Not suspicion exactly, more like a change in the atmospheric pressure of our house. He came home later each week. He showered immediately. He was affectionate in a practiced, almost deliberate way that felt different from the easy, thoughtless affection we had always had. He started complimenting my appearance more, which sounds like a good thing until you realize that a man who has always found you attractive doesn't suddenly rediscover it unless something else is driving the observation. I told myself I was being paranoid, stressed, overworked. I had a demanding project at the firm and I was sleeping badly. Surely that was coloring everything. Then came the 3rd Friday in October. Daniel left for work that morning in a rush. Coffee in a travel mug, laptop bag over one shoulder, keys jangling. He kissed me on the cheek. He said he'd probably be late. He drove away. 20 minutes later, I was getting ready for my own commute when I saw it on the kitchen counter. His phone. The black case. The cracked bottom left corner he kept meaning to get fixed. Lying beside the fruit bowl like a small, silent bomb. I picked it up to set it aside, and at that exact moment, it rang. The contact name on the screen was simply a letter. V. I don't know what possessed me to answer. Some instinct that had been building for 7 months without my permission. My thumb slid across the screen before my brain had time to form a rational objection. "Hey, baby." Her voice was warm and low, the kind of voice that implies a specific kind of intimacy. "Are you already on your way?" I said nothing. A brief pause on her end. "Daniel? Hello?" Still I said nothing. The kitchen was very quiet. Biscuit lifted his head from his bed in the corner and looked at me. "Hello," she said again, with a faint edge of uncertainty now. I hung up. I set the phone back on the counter exactly where I had found it. I picked up my bag. I walked to my car. I sat in the driveway for 4 full minutes staring at the garage door. Then I opened the recent calls on my own phone, found the number that had just called Daniel's, and I typed it into Google. The number was registered to a business, a small interior design studio on the north side of the city. V. Cole Interiors. The address was on North Clark Street. I did not go to work that day. I drove north. The studio was on the ground floor of a converted brownstone, a tasteful little sign on the door, a display window with fabric swatches and framed mood boards. I parked across the street and I sat there and I looked at it. And standing behind the glass, talking on her own phone now, laughing at something, was a woman. Tall, early 30s, dark hair pulled back, pretty in an effortless way that somehow made everything worse. I didn't go inside that day. I just looked, but I had seen enough to understand that the house I thought I had been building for 11 years was not the house I was actually living in. And from that moment on, I started paying very close attention to the blueprints. I drove home in a kind of suspended silence, not crying, not yet. There's a phase that comes before tears, when the mind is simply processing a reality it hasn't fully accepted, running it through every available filter, trying to find an explanation that doesn't mean what it clearly means. I went through all of them on the 40-minute drive back to Birchwood Drive. Maybe V was a colleague. Maybe the warmth in her voice was just how she talked to everyone. Maybe, "Are you already on your way?" referred to a meeting, a site visit, something professional and entirely innocent. But I had heard her voice, and I knew. There is a particular kind of knowledge that lives in your body before it reaches your thoughts. I had felt it for months, that quiet shift in atmospheric pressure, and now it had a face behind a glass window and a phone number attached to a business and a voice that called my husband baby. I got home before Daniel. I took Biscuit for a walk around the block, which I did not need but which I absolutely needed. The October air was sharp and clean, and the leaves were going orange on the maples, and everything was beautiful in a way that felt almost offensive. I walked and I breathed and I tried to think clearly. By the time I got back inside, something had changed in me. The numb shock was still there, but underneath it, like a current beneath ice, something else was forming. Daniel came home at 8:30. He noticed his phone on the counter immediately. I watched his face as he picked it up, saw the flicker of concern as he checked it, saw it relax when presumably he found nothing alarming. He looked at me. He smiled. "Long day," he said. "There's leftover pasta in the fridge if you want some." I smiled back. "Thanks, I already ate." That was the most important performance of my life, and I didn't even know it yet. That night I lay awake beside him in the dark, listening to him breathe, and I began, for the first time in 11 years, to truly look at our life together, not through the lens of love and habit, but through the cold, precise lens of an audit. What did we have? The house on Birchwood Drive, purchased together in 2018, both names on the deed, currently worth approximately $480,000, based on a neighbor's recent sale. Our joint savings account held just under $94,000. We had 2 retirement accounts. Daniel had been managing our investments for the last 4 years through an advisor I had met exactly once at a holiday party. Here was what frightened me most. I didn't fully know what we had. I had trusted him with the architecture of our financial life the same way I had trusted him with everything else. I was a project manager at work, meticulous, detailed-oriented, relentless. But at home, I had been soft. I had let myself be soft. That was my first mistake, and it would be my last. In the weeks that followed, I moved carefully, quietly, deliberately. I did not confront Daniel. Confrontation, I understood instinctively, was a gun you only got to fire once, and I wasn't ready to fire it. Not without knowing exactly what I had in my hands first. I started with paper. Over 2 weeks while Daniel was at work, I went through every file in his home office. Tax returns going back 6 years, bank statements, credit card bills. I photographed everything with my phone, then organized the images into a folder on a cloud drive he had no access to. What I found over those 2 weeks confirmed what my body had already known. There were cash withdrawals, regular, predictable, every Friday ranging from $200 to $400. There were restaurant charges in neighborhoods we never visited together. There was a hotel stay in a suburb north of the city. From a weekend, he had told me he was at a conference in Cincinnati. I found the conference registration confirmation in his email archive. He had registered, but never checked in. 7 months. That was how long the paper trail went back. That was when it started, or at least when it became financially visible. I sat with all of it on a Saturday afternoon when he was out at a hardware store, spread across the kitchen table in careful rows, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not grief, not rage, but a cold and clarifying focus. The kind I felt at work when a project was in crisis and everything depended on executing the next 20 steps without error. This was a crisis, and I was the only project manager on site. I put everything back exactly where I had found it. I poured myself a glass of water. I sat at the kitchen island and I thought about what came next. Here was my plan, in its rough first form. I needed documentation, professional, airtight documentation that could not be dismissed or explained away. I needed to understand every asset we held before a single dollar could be moved or hidden. And I needed to do all of this without alerting Daniel, or whoever V was, that anything had changed. Because the moment he knew I knew, the clock would start, and I intended to control the clock. By Sunday night, I had made 3 decisions that would change everything. I would hire a private investigator. I would make a confidential appointment with a divorce attorney, and I would not let my face betray a single thing. I made us breakfast Monday morning. Scrambled eggs, his favorite. I asked how he slept. He said fine. Good, I said, and poured his coffee. I had never been so calm in my life. The private investigator's name was Gary Holloway. He had a small office above a dry cleaner on Madison Street. Not glamorous, but his online reviews were consistent and specific, which told me he was actually working cases rather than just cashing checks. I found him on a Tuesday afternoon during my lunch break, sitting in my car 3 blocks from my office with my earbuds in, so that anyone walking past would assume I was on a work call. I told him what I needed: surveillance on Friday evenings, photographs, verification of an address, dates, times, documentation that would hold up if it needed to. I told him I wanted nothing confrontational, nothing illegal, nothing that could blow back on me in court. He listened without reacting, which I took as professionalism. He named a flat fee for 2 weeks of work, plus a per-hour rate for any time beyond that. I transferred a retainer from my personal account, one I had quietly opened 2 weeks earlier in my name only, and I shook his hand and drove back to the office. I had crossed the first line. There was no uncrossing it. During those 2 weeks, I also kept my appointment with a family law attorney named Patricia Vance. Her office was in Oak Park, far enough from Naperville that I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew. She was in her late 50s, methodical and direct in the way that serious lawyers often are, and she did not waste a single word on sympathy before she started asking the questions that mattered. She explained Illinois divorce law to me in plain terms. Illinois is an equitable distribution state, meaning marital assets are divided fairly, not necessarily 50-50, but based on a range of factors including contributions to the marriage, economic circumstances, and the length of the union. Fault, she told me, was not a direct factor in asset distribution in Illinois, but it could influence certain decisions, particularly if I could demonstrate that marital funds had been used to finance an extramarital relationship. That detail landed with weight: cash withdrawals, hotel stays, dinners. Every dollar Daniel had spent on V over the past 7 months was, potentially, relevant. Document everything, Patricia said. I'm working on it, I told her. Meanwhile, something was shifting at home that I hadn't anticipated. Daniel became watchful. I noticed it in small ways first. He started coming home a little earlier on the weekdays, not dramatically, but consistently enough that I registered the change. He was more present at dinner, asking questions about my work, my week, lingering over coffee in the mornings when he used to be out the door by 7:15. It should have felt warm. It felt like someone checking the perimeter of a house they were suddenly unsure was secure. One evening, I came downstairs to find him standing in the kitchen holding his laptop, the screen tilted slightly away from me as I entered. He closed it casually. He smiled. "Hey, thought you were reading." "Just getting some water," I said. He nodded. We talked about something inconsequential, but I filed that moment away carefully. He had sensed something. Not what, not yet, but something. I said nothing. I smiled more. I cooked dinner twice that week without being asked. I was performing the role of a woman who noticed nothing, and I was performing it flawlessly. Then on the 3rd Friday of November, Gary Holloway sent me a secure file. I opened it in my car in the parking garage of a shopping mall on Route 59, engine off, phone on the lowest screen brightness, hands that I had to consciously steady. There were 43 photographs. Daniel's car outside the brownstone on North Clark Street at 6:47 p.m. Daniel entering the building. Daniel and a woman, Vanessa Cole, same dark hair, same height, photographed through the lit window of what appeared to be an apartment above the studio, a space that the studio website described as a private consultation loft, available for client meetings. The photographs were time-stamped across 4 consecutive Fridays. There was also a supplementary report. Gary had pulled publicly available records and found that the loft was registered as a residential unit, not commercial space. Vanessa Cole was listed as the sole leaseholder. She had rented it 18 months ago. 18 months. The financial paper trail went back 7. The actual arrangement apparently went back even further. I looked at those photographs for a long time. I thought about 11 years, 8 of them married. The pale yellow house on Birchwood Drive, the vegetable garden that only half worked, Biscuit, the Thai food every Friday, which he had been skipping, I now realized, for the better part of a year. I had been eating it alone. Something inside me went very, very still. I forwarded the file to a secure email address I had created for this purpose. I sent a copy to Patricia Vance with a brief message. I have what we need. Please prepare the filing. Then I drove home. I made dinner. I asked Daniel about his day. He told me about a project in Schaumburg. I listened. I nodded. I passed him the bread. And I thought, you have no idea what is coming. Patricia filed the divorce petition on a Monday morning in late November. I was at my desk at work when she sent me the confirmation. I read the email twice, then set my phone face down on the desk and stared at the wall for about 30 seconds. Then I pulled up my current project file and got back to work because falling apart was not on my schedule. There were practical things that needed to happen in rapid sequence, and I had spent the past 3 weeks mapping them out with the same precision I applied to construction timelines. The previous Thursday, I had met with a financial advisor, not ours, mine us, and worked through every account I could identify. Patricia had also connected me with a forensic accountant named Dev Krishnamurti, who spent 2 days reviewing the documents I had photographed in Daniel's office. Dev confirmed that approximately $18,400 had moved through cash withdrawals and secondary transactions over the past 7 months that could be reasonably attributed to expenses outside the marriage. He flagged a brokerage account I hadn't known about that Daniel had opened in his name only and had been funding through small transfers from our joint investment account for nearly 2 years. A brokerage account I hadn't known about. I had to sit with that for a moment. On Patricia's advice, I contacted our joint bank and placed a formal notification of pending divorce proceedings, which restricted large unilateral withdrawals. I also withdrew a reasonable amount, one Patricia had specified was defensible, into my personal account to cover living expenses and legal fees. I did not touch the savings beyond that amount. I wanted to be unimpeachable. Daniel found out on Wednesday. He came home at 5 o'clock, which he never did. His face was a color I had never seen on him. Not angry exactly, but shaken in the way that someone is shaken when they have just been handed information their body doesn't know how to process yet. He had the divorce petition in his hand. It had been served to him at his office. He stood in the front hallway and looked at me across the kitchen island. "What is this?" His voice was quiet. "You know what it is," I said. I kept my voice level. I was standing at the counter chopping carrots. I did not put the knife down. "Sarah, I have an attorney. You should get one." I turned back to the carrots. "There's nothing to discuss until we're in that context." He set the papers on the island. He stood there for a long moment. Then he walked upstairs. That night, he tried. He came into the kitchen after an hour and he was different, softer, more careful, the voice that had once worked on me reliably when he wanted something. He was sorry. He had made a terrible mistake. It was over. It meant nothing. He loved me. We had too much to just throw it away. He used the word please 4 times, which was 3 more times than I had heard him use it in the past 2 years. I listened to all of it. I let him finish. "Get an attorney," I said, and went upstairs. But Daniel wasn't the only one who called. 2 days later, my personal cell phone rang from an unknown number while I was in a meeting. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was 47 seconds long, and I stood in a bathroom stall to listen to it with the volume low. It was her, Vanessa Cole. Her voice was not warm now. It was controlled in the manner of someone controlling themselves very carefully. She said she thought we should talk, that this situation was more complicated than I understood, that I was making decisions without knowing the full picture, that she would really like for me to hear her out before things went further. It was, I recognized, a negotiation opener wearing the costume of a reasonable request. She called again the next evening, and again the morning after. I did not answer any of them. On Friday, I got a text from an unknown number. Different number, but the same careful tone. "Sarah, there are things about your marriage you don't know. We should meet. It would be better for everyone. Better for everyone." I almost laughed. I forwarded every voicemail and text to Patricia immediately. She noted them and added them to the file with a word I had come to love: documentation. What I did not expect was the moment the following Saturday when I walked to my car in the parking lot of the grocery store and Vanessa Cole was standing next to it. She was composed, expensive coat, sunglasses, though the sky was flat and gray. She said she had just wanted to talk in person, that she wasn't trying to frighten me. She said that Daniel loved her. She said it with the particular confidence of a woman who believes the geography of a situation has already been decided. I looked at her for a moment. "You're contacting a represented party in an active divorce proceeding," I said. "I'd like you to note that this conversation is being recorded." I held up my phone, which had been recording since I'd seen her walking toward me, a habit I had formed in the past 2 weeks. "Everything you've said is going to my attorney. I suggest you stop contacting me." She opened her mouth, closed it. Something shifted in her composure. Not much, but enough. I got in my car and drove away. That evening I called my sister, Claire, who lived in Evanston. I told her everything, all of it properly for the first time. She was at my door by 9 o'clock with wine and fury in roughly equal proportion, and she held me while I cried for the first time since this had started. It was the first time I let myself actually feel the weight of what was happening. I spent the weekend at Claire's. I slept, I ate, I walked by the lake. I let myself be a person instead of a chess player for 48 hours. On Monday morning, I drove back to Naperville with my hands steady on the wheel. I was ready for whatever came next. December arrived, and with it came a particular quality of cold, the kind that settles into the bones of old houses and old marriages alike. The pale yellow colonial felt different now, quieter. I had asked Daniel to move into the guest room while the proceedings were active, citing the advice of my attorney, which was true, and he had complied without argument, which surprised me until I realized that compliance was its own strategy. He was trying a new approach. It started with small things. A cup of coffee appeared on the kitchen counter one morning, already made, with the exact amount of creamer I liked. He shoveled the driveway without being asked. He bought Biscuit a new toy and left it on the kitchen island with no note. These gestures were so carefully calibrated to our history, to the specific texture of how we had been good together, that they almost worked. That is the honest truth. There were 2 evenings in the first week of December when I sat in the living room after he had gone upstairs and thought, "Is this real? Did he mean it? Could we?" And then I would think of 43 photographs, 18 months of a woman's loft above a design studio, a brokerage account I hadn't known about, 7 months of Friday evenings eating Thai food alone while he was 25 miles north telling someone else he was on his way. The cold clarity would return. It always returned now. What was Daniel actually doing? I thought about it carefully, the way a project manager thinks about a contractor who is suddenly performing perfectly after months of missed deadlines. He wasn't changing. He was buying time. He was hoping that enough well-placed gestures would erode my resolve before a settlement was reached. It was not love. It was risk management. Vanessa, for her part, had gone quiet after the parking lot encounter, but not absent. Patricia had received a letter from her attorney requesting that I return certain personal property allegedly left at our marital home, which was a transparent attempt to establish contact and assess how far along our proceedings were. There was no such property, and Patricia responded accordingly. Through Claire, I learned that Vanessa had also apparently reached out to at least one mutual acquaintance, a couple we had socialized with intermittently, the Harrisons, under the guise of asking how I was doing. Sandra Harrison called me directly about it, which I appreciated. Sandra was the kind of woman who had excellent radar for when someone was collecting information rather than expressing concern. "She's fishing," Sandra said simply. "I know," I said. "Thank you for telling me. What can I do to help?" That question, "What can I do to help?" was more powerful than it sounds, because in the strange isolation of those weeks, I had begun to feel the particular loneliness of someone fighting a private war in plain sight. At work, I was professional and composed. With Daniel, I was measured and distant. Only with Claire did I let the guard fully down. And while Claire was essential, I was beginning to understand that I needed more than one person in my corner. I joined a divorce support group that met Thursday evenings at a community center in Wheaton. I was initially resistant to the idea. I am, by nature, a private person. But Claire pushed, and I went once, and then I went back. It was a group of 8 women and 1 man, facilitated by a licensed therapist named Dr. Angela Morse, who had the precise blend of warmth and directness that made you feel both heard and held accountable. What struck me in those first 2 sessions was not how different all our stories were, but how similar the architecture of betrayal tended to be. Different specifics, same blueprint. Someone trusted, someone hidden, a slow erosion you didn't see until you couldn't unsee it. A woman named Jo, who was 3 months further along in her own proceedings than I was, said something in the 3rd session that I wrote down verbatim in my phone. The moment you stop needing their approval to feel certain about your decision is the moment you actually win. I thought about Daniel's careful coffee, his shoveled driveway. Was I certain? Yes, I was absolutely certain. Patricia and I met the week before Christmas to review where we stood. The forensic accounting was complete. Dev had documented the full scope of the dissipated marital assets, and the number was significant enough to materially strengthen my position. Gary's surveillance photographs had been properly prepared as potential evidence. The petition had been answered by Daniel's attorney. He had retained one. Finally, a man named Schreiber, who had a reputation for drawn-out proceedings, which Patricia had anticipated. "He's going to slow-walk this," she said. "His attorney's strategy will be delay and attrition. They're hoping you run out of money or willpower." I looked at her steadily. "Then they've misjudged their opponent." She smiled just slightly. "That's what I thought." I drove home through December dark, streetlights reflecting on wet pavement, Christmas lights beginning to appear on the neighborhood houses. I thought about the woman I had been 12 months ago, content in her photograph of a life, eating Thai food on Fridays, trusting the blueprint. And I thought about the woman driving this car right now, the one who had built a real one. It was the 2nd Saturday of January when they came. I say they because, though I didn't know it until I opened the door, it was both of them, Daniel and Vanessa, standing on the front porch of the house on Birchwood Drive at 11 in the morning, as though arriving together at my door was a perfectly normal thing to do. As though the geometry of their presence in the same frame in front of my own house was not in itself an act of aggression dressed as a social call. Daniel was in front. He had his hands in his coat pockets, which was a posture he adopted when he was trying to appear non-threatening. Vanessa stood 1 step back, which was deliberate, close enough to be visible, far enough to seem deferential. She was wearing a cream-colored coat. She looked, as she always apparently looked, composed. I had been having coffee at the kitchen island when the doorbell rang. I looked through the side window before I opened the door, saw them both, felt the cold drop in my stomach that I recognized by now as the physical precursor to the adrenaline I had learned to channel. I opened the door. I did not invite them in. Sarah. Daniel's voice had the particular texture of someone who has rehearsed what they're about to say, enough times that it sounds almost natural. We just want to talk. Calmly, that's all. Your attorney can contact my attorney, I said. Just 5 minutes. He stepped forward slightly. Please. We think there's a way through this that works for everyone. For everyone. There was that phrase again. I looked at Vanessa. She met my eyes and offered something that was architecturally a smile. I know this must feel very hostile, she said, with a gentleness so precisely calibrated that it took me a moment to locate the condescension inside it. But we genuinely want to resolve this without it getting more painful for you than it needs to be. For me. More painful for me. As if I was the one who needed protection from pain. As if I was the fragile element in this arrangement. I understood then exactly what this was. A performance of reasonableness designed to make me feel that prolonging the legal process was my choice, my stubbornness, my damage. They had come together, which was itself a pressure tactic, a united front, a demonstration that they were we and I was alone, to make me feel that I was the obstacle to everyone's peace. Come in, I said. I led them to the living room. I did not offer coffee. I sat in the armchair across from the couch, which put distance and furniture between us. I folded my hands in my lap. I waited. Daniel did most of the talking. He had a proposal. Of course, he had a proposal. He wanted to negotiate privately, outside the legal process, a settlement agreement between us without the courts fully involved, which would be faster and less expensive for everyone. He was willing to be generous, he said. He named a figure, a buyout of my share of the house. That was, Patricia had already told me, approximately 30% below the assessed value. He framed it as an act of goodwill. Then Vanessa spoke. She said she understood that I was angry. She genuinely did, and that my feelings were completely valid, but she said that going to court would be brutal for me professionally. She had heard, she said with practiced casualness, that my firm was going through some structural changes, that a prolonged personal legal situation could make things complicated for someone in a client-facing management role. She looked at me steadily as she said it. She was not smiling anymore. There it was. Not a veiled threat. A barely veiled one. She was suggesting that if I pushed this to court, she had the means or the connections to make my professional life difficult. I didn't know if it was true. It didn't matter if it was true. What mattered was that she was willing to say it out loud in my living room. I looked at her for a moment. Then I looked at Daniel. I want you both to leave, I said. My voice was even. Right now. Sarah, we're trying to. You came to my home without my attorney's knowledge. You made a below-market settlement offer and then made a professional threat in the same conversation. I stood up. Both of those things are going in my attorney's notes today. I'd recommend that yours know about this visit. Daniel's jaw tightened. The practiced softness disappeared. You're going to make this difficult, he said, and it wasn't a question. I'm going to make this accurate, I said. There's a difference. Vanessa stood. There was no composure left in her face now. What was underneath it was colder and less elegant. You're choosing the worst possible outcome for yourself, she said. I've already had the worst possible outcome, I said. This is the recovery. I walked to the front door and held it open. They left. I watched their car pull away from the curb. I closed the door. I locked it. Then I stood in the hallway with my back against the door, and for about 30 seconds, I let myself feel the fear. Because it was there. It was real. The professional threat had landed somewhere tender. My job was important to me. My independence was built on it. The thought that she could reach into that part of my life and damage it made my hands cold. But here is what I had learned over the past months about fear. It has a center of gravity. And if you let yourself fall into it all the way instead of circling the edge, it becomes something else. It becomes information. It becomes a map of exactly what you're protecting and exactly why you're fighting. I picked up my phone and called Patricia. They came to the house, I said. Both of them. I recorded it. A brief pause. Send me the recording. Already did, I said. She made a professional threat, indirect but clear. Good, Patricia said. And I had come to understand that when Patricia said good, she meant, they've given us something else to work with. I made another cup of coffee. I sat at the kitchen island. I thought about Joe's words from the support group. The moment you stop needing their approval to feel certain is the moment you actually win. I had never been more certain in my life. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in March. Gray, cold, indifferent to the weight of what was happening inside the courthouse on that particular day. I wore a charcoal blazer and black trousers, my hair pulled back in something that said composed professional rather than grieving wife, because I had understood for some time that the way a woman presents herself in a legal proceeding is itself a form of testimony. Patricia was already in the hallway when I arrived. She had a leather portfolio under one arm and the expression of a person who has spent weeks preparing for exactly this and is ready for all of it. We reviewed our sequencing for 12 minutes at a corner table near the window. Then the doors opened and we went in. Daniel and his attorney, Schreiber, a compact man in his early 60s with a reputation for procedural delay and patrician confidence, were already seated when we entered. Daniel was in a navy suit I recognized. He looked at me as I sat down. I looked at him with the same neutrality I would bring to reviewing a project specification that wasn't going to change regardless of how many times I read it. The presiding judge was the Honorable Patricia Ann Delgado. I had read everything available about her. She had been on the domestic relations bench for 9 years. She was known for 2 things: meticulous adherence to documentation and very little patience for courtroom theater. That suited me perfectly. Schreiber opened, and his strategy was what Patricia had predicted: minimize the significance of the infidelity to asset distribution, challenge the methodology of the forensic accounting, suggest that my financial decisions since learning of the affair, the personal account, the notification to the joint bank, were themselves forms of unilateral asset control. It was professional and reasonably well constructed. He was trying to turn this into a mutual conflict rather than a one-directional one. Then Patricia presented our case. She began with the forensic accounting. Dev Krishnamurti had prepared a clear documented report showing $18,400 in dissipated marital assets, cash withdrawals and transactions corresponding to the Friday evening pattern, the hotel stay, restaurant charges in Lincoln Park, charges at a jewelry store in Wicker Park, a purchase that Dev had traced through the vendor's public registry corresponded to a necklace now worn in Vanessa Cole's own social media photographs from November of the prior year. Marital funds, spent on another woman, documented, time-stamped, traceable. She then moved to the brokerage account. Daniel's attorney had maintained that it was a personal investment vehicle funded prior to the marriage, but Dev's report showed clearly that 3 of the 4 primary funding transfers had occurred after our wedding, sourced from the joint investment account in amounts below the threshold typically flagged in account reviews. It was methodical. It was deliberate. It was, Patricia said with measured precision, a pattern. And then she submitted Gary Holloway's surveillance record. Schreiber objected on relevance grounds. Judge Delgado noted that in Illinois, while fault does not govern distribution, evidence of dissipated marital funds is directly relevant to equitable distribution. And since the surveillance record corroborated the financial record, she would hear it. The objection was overruled. 43 photographs, 18 months of a residential loft registered to Vanessa Cole. The pattern made visible. Then Daniel was called to testify. This is where composure came apart. Schreiber had prepared him. I could see that. He was initially measured in his answers, sticking to framing that minimized and softened. But Patricia was a precise cross-examiner, and she had a particular skill for asking questions so specific that a prepared answer becomes a trap. She asked about the cash withdrawals. He said they were personal expenses. She asked him to name some. He hesitated. He said various things. Lunches, he said at one point. Patricia noted that the withdrawal amounts averaged $280 and occurred consistently on Friday evenings, and asked whether his lunches regularly cost that amount on Friday evenings. The courtroom was very quiet. She asked about the hotel stay in the northern suburb during the Cincinnati conference. He said he had extended his trip for personal time. She noted that his conference registration showed no check-in and asked how he had managed to stay at a conference hotel without checking in. He said he had stayed elsewhere. She asked where. He named a hotel that was not the one in the financial record. She presented the actual record. He corrected himself. Judge Delgado watched all of this from the bench with the expression of a person who is very experienced in what they are watching. When his attorney attempted redirect and asked Daniel to explain the discrepancy, Daniel said he had been confused about the dates. It was a long time ago. He'd had a lot going on. Patricia, on recross, asked whether he found it difficult to remember details of the trip because there had been many such trips. "Objection," said Schreiber. "Argumentative." "Withdrawn," said Patricia. She didn't need the answer. The question had done its work. I sat at the plaintiff's table through all of it, and I did not move, did not react, did not look at Daniel with anything other than neutral attention. Inside, I felt the particular calm of someone who has been building toward a single point for months and has finally arrived at it. All the early mornings with spreadsheets, the parking garages, the bathroom stalls, listening to voicemails, the Thursday evenings in Wheaton, the Saturday morning when 2 people stood on my porch and told me I was choosing the worst outcome for myself. Here was the outcome. When court was adjourned for the day and reconvened the following morning for closing arguments, I walked out into the cold March air and called Claire. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it honestly for a moment. "Like someone who built something that held," I said. Judge Delgado issued her ruling 11 days after the hearing concluded. I was at my desk at work when Patricia called. I walked into the small glass-walled conference room adjacent to my office, the one we used for client presentations, and I sat down and I listened. The ruling was comprehensive. On the marital home, given the dissipation findings and the documented pattern of financial conduct, the court awarded me 60% of the net equity in the property, with Daniel required to either refinance in my favor or agree to a sale within 90 days, with proceeds distributed accordingly. At current market value, my share was approximately $168,000. on the joint retirement and investment accounts, split equitably at 50-50, with a direct offset applied to account for the dissipated marital assets, meaning the $18,400 Dev had documented was credited back to my share from Daniel's portion of the accounts. On the undisclosed brokerage account, the judge found that the funding pattern constituted a transfer of marital assets into a separate vehicle without disclosure, which is considered a breach of fiduciary duty in Illinois marital law. The full current value of that account, $31,200, was awarded to me. On attorney fees, given the documented history of the contact at my home, the professional threat recorded during the January visit, and the general conduct of the proceedings, Judge Delgado ordered Daniel to contribute $12,000 toward my legal costs. Patricia read the relevant portions to me in her steady, measured voice. When she finished, there was a brief silence. "Is that?" I started. "Yes," she said. "It's everything we asked for, plus the fees." I sat for a moment in the conference room with my phone against my ear, looking out the glass wall at the open office floor where my colleagues moved through their ordinary Thursday afternoon. And I thought about a woman sitting alone at a kitchen counter eating soup on a Friday evening in March, more than a year ago, thinking nothing of it. "Thank you," I said to Patricia, "for everything." "You did the work," she said. Daniel's attorney filed a notice of intent to appeal within the week, which Patricia had anticipated and for which she was prepared. Schreiber's grounds were narrow and, she believed, unlikely to succeed. The dissipation evidence had been thorough, the judge's reasoning was well documented, and appeals in domestic cases are expensive and slow. 3 weeks later, Schreiber withdrew the appeal notice. Patricia never told me exactly what had prompted that decision. I didn't ask. Daniel agreed to sell the house. Within 60 days, Birchwood Drive had a "for sale" sign in the yard. I spent 2 weekends moving my things into a 2-bedroom apartment in the Andersonville neighborhood of Chicago. Bright windows, hardwood floors, a view of the street from the kitchen island. I brought biscuit. I brought my vegetable garden seeds, even though I didn't have a yard, because I decided I'd find containers for the balcony and start smaller. On the day the house sold, I drove past it once. The new owners had already replaced the front door wreath. It looked exactly like someone else's house, which was exactly correct, because it had become exactly that. I stopped the car for a moment. I looked at it. I thought about everything that had happened inside those walls. The good years, the fractures I hadn't seen, the early mornings with photographed documents spread across the kitchen table, the night Claire arrived with wine and fury. Then I drove to Andersonville, parked in my new spot, carried biscuit up the stairs, and made coffee in my own kitchen. The account transfers settled. The brokerage funds arrived. The attorney fee payment was made. Every piece of the legal architecture Patricia had built came down on the right side, in the right order, with no loose ends. Vanessa Cole's name did not appear in the judgment because she was not party to it. But I want to be honest. I had thought about what she had said on my porch. "You're choosing the worst possible outcome for yourself." I had turned that sentence over many times in the months since. She'd been wrong about which one of us had already chosen the worst outcome. She just hadn't known it yet. The apartment in Andersonville became home faster than I expected. I had been afraid of that quietly. Afraid that without the pale yellow colonial, without the 11-year architecture of a shared life, I would feel unmoored. What I actually felt, once the boxes were unpacked and the balcony containers were planted with tomatoes and basil, was something I had almost forgotten the name of: ease. A low-frequency, persistent ease that came from living inside a life that was entirely, actually, mine. I was promoted that spring. The structural changes Vanessa had alluded to with such delicate menace turned out to be an organizational restructuring that required a senior project manager, me. The firm offered me a title and a salary increase that made me sit down after reading the offer letter. I called Claire and read her the number. She made a sound I would describe as triumphant. We celebrated at a Thai restaurant on Broadway. Our choice, our Friday evening, our takeout cartons on my new kitchen island. I thought about how the same thing can feel completely different depending on who you share it with. Thursday evenings in Wheaton continued for several more months. I watched other women arrive where I had once arrived, raw, uncertain, caught between grief and resolve, and tried to be what Joe had been for me, a person a little further along the same road saying, "It holds, keep walking." Claire met someone in the fall, a quiet, funny civil engineer named Marcus. I was at their first dinner party in November and found myself genuinely happy in a room full of people. I started running 3 mornings a week along the lakefront. Biscuit occasionally on a leash, though not particularly built for speed. The lake in the morning was good. The city from that angle was good. As for Daniel and Vanessa, I learned what I learned through mutual acquaintances, and I did not spend energy pursuing it. By fall, Sandra Harrison mentioned Daniel had been seen dining alone near his old office 3 Fridays running. By October, he had moved to a corporate apartment in the West Loop. The loft on North Clark Street was no longer shared. Vanessa's interior design studio closed in November. Several client relationships had dissolved over the year, coinciding with a period when her professional reputation had attracted closer scrutiny from people who had been paying attention to the divorce proceedings. I did not feel vindicated. There was no satisfaction exactly, just a quiet recognition that choices tend to settle where they belong, like sediment finding the floor of a lake. By my apartment's first anniversary, I had a new rhythm. Morning runs, coffee at the kitchen island, biscuit on the couch, balcony tomatoes doing better than the yard ever had, a job I was good at, a sister who stayed too late for dinner, a life built on something real. Late one November evening, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine and thought about what I had missed and why. The answer: I had been so invested in the architecture of our shared life that I had stopped reading the actual structure. I had trusted the blueprint and stopped checking the walls. Real trust is not passivity. It is something you verify, not something you simply assume. I was 38 years old on that balcony. The city was lit up below me, the night cold and clear, and I had no idea what came next. It felt, surprisingly and completely, like freedom. So I ask you, if you picked up that phone and heard "baby, are you on your way?" what would you do next? Would you confront immediately? Would you plan quietly? Would you freeze? There is no wrong answer. There is only your answer, and the life you decide you deserve on the other side of it. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And thank you truly for listening all the way to the end.